Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, it's always important to remember how the war began. 334 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and terror affiliates from the Gaza Strip launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Subsequently, the next day, on October 8th of last year, Iran practically joined that war by greenlighting its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since that date, thousands of rockets have been fired towards Israel, and not only from Lebanese territory, but also from Yemen by the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq, and other Iranian militias in Syria, including Iran proper, when it launched a direct attack against Israel on the night between the 13th and 14th of April earlier this year. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, before we turn to General Gavish for an update on the cross-border attacks that have taken place with massive barrages of rockets also today from Lebanese territory towards Israel, what can you tell us initially on the Gazan front and that of Judea and Samaria?
So, Jonathan, for the last 334 days, we have been conducting this update, and we call it Israel at War. But actually, we here in the panel and similar panels always talk out of our ivory tower. And what the Israeli on the street, especially, of course, those displaced first from the Negev in the south, then from the Galilee and Golan in the north, from what they hear is a constant barrage of news and announcements regarding the various fronts. And people can get confused because, take for instance, the so-called Philadelphia corridor, which has been the focus of attention lately. They hear that the Prime Minister Netanyahu thinks that this is the most crucial part of the fight in Gaza, and that Israel should hold on to it at any price. They hear that experts, practitioners, the heads of the various military and security services think that there are technical solutions for that, and that this should not hamper the achievement of a ceasefire and the hostage deal. And then they hear that mere hours before Netanyahu faced the nation to explain why Israel should under no circumstances budge from the Philadelphia corridor, he authorized the Mossad chief to tell the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, as well as the United States, that under the outline of the deal, Israel could very well do that in the second stage of the formula now being hatched. So people are very much confused. And as to your question, yes, there are still operations going on, both in Gaza in various sectors, north, central, south, and in Judea, around Nablus mostly, and Samaria, near Nablus, and Judea, near Hebron. So there is no quiet front here surrounding Israel.
Let's turn first to Central Israel, where we're joined by Colonel in Reserve Miri Eisen, who just until recently was the director of the ICT, the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University, as well as a senior fellow there still. A long list of very impressive positions, which we will not now delve into since we won't have enough time for the entire program. Nonetheless, it's great to see you, Miri. I'd like to utilize your brilliant articulate capacity to make sense of nonsensible scenarios, and particularly with Amir portraying the confusion that comes out not only by the leaking of information from rooms that should, in most cases, be kept within those rooms, that data, also to have mixed messages coming out of Israel's leadership, be they in the government or in the opposition, about the path forward. What should we understand from this whole situation, and what is the right path forward?
Every time I'm asked that kind of a question, Jonathan, I want everybody to breathe in deep. And the reason I say that is because you're listening right now and you want an answer. And when you say an answer, you want a solution. It's as if it's Einstein, it's m times c squared, and that just goes to show that I'm bad at physics, because we're not talking about a physical solution. We're talking about different ideas, different understandings, and we actually have different positions when it comes both to the security importance of places and to the implications of diplomacy versus security. And I want to break that down for a moment. It isn't either security, keeping the Philadelphia corridor, or diplomacy, talking to, at the end, Hamas and bringing back hostages. It's both. You have to show your military strength. That's part of the equation. And you need to continue with diplomacy, because Israel does not want to be isolated, not in the world, let alone we need to get back our hostages after 334 days, and we can't change what happened in the past. So when people are looking for that absolute answer, it's about Philadelphia corridor, I'm going to disagree with them. For those who come and say it's about doing whatever the Hamas ask for, no matter what, to get back our hostages, I'm going to also say, sadly, I can't do that either, which means you need to compromise and you need to negotiate. And the worst part of that is that on the other side is a genocidal, horrific terror organization that is trying to portray itself in a very different way, that put out in the last 24 hours horrific psychological warfare in Hebrew, English, and Arabic that's supposed to talk to all of us. And in it says, either you can stay in Philadelphia corridor, or in their little film, we're going to murder more hostages. They say they're murdering them. So I answer in that sense by breathing in deep. There is no nice solution. There is no either or. It's a combination of both, and nobody knows exactly what that means. But if we don't go forward in negotiations, we're not going to get back hostages alive. And if we don't stay strong militarily, we have Hamas and Hezbollah and all of the list of the other ones that you mentioned at the beginning that have been attacking us from October 7th and 8th. And you have to look at the whole picture. It's not an easy one, but that's how I would describe it.
Unfortunate and brilliant at the same time, but nonetheless, General Kavish, commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, it's always a pleasure to see you. I'd like to shift gears to the north, where we saw residents being struck directly by a projectile in a wave of rockets and missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles that was launched earlier today amongst various barrages of 65 rockets in a very significant forced attack directed towards, among others, also civilian communities. What can you tell us about that, and what should we prepare for when we're talking about the defensive front, but also on the offense?
Well, Jonathan, everything is connected to everything, unfortunately, in our region. And we have to remember that when was it, like 10 days ago, we had a counter attack against the Hezbollah. There were a lot of those that were happy. But unfortunately, it didn't really change the strategic posture on the northern part of Israel or in the other parts that Israel is dealing with. So we are back to square one on the northern arena. Back to square one means that what started on the 8th of October still continues, is being continued. And what we are seeing is that although yesterday was quiet, today, as you mentioned, more than 65 rockets were shot toward the northern part of Israel, mainly to the city of Kiryat Shmone. The Hezbollah is saying that is aiming to a military bases, but is hitting civilians, and one of them, a house that was severely hurt by this rocket in Kiryat Shmone, which is a civilian city, and there is no bases around it. So this is unfortunately the situation that we have to deal with. From a military point of view, we continuously say that the vast majority of the rockets and the projectiles that are being shot toward Israel are being intercepted by the Air Force, by the air and missile defense, but the defense is never hermetic. And this is unfortunately the result that once in a while we see that our civilian cities are being hit. So this is the situation in the north. As I said, everything is connected to everything. From the strategic point of view, Israel is still on the same posture, which is attack in the south part of Israel, active defense on the south, on the northern part of Israel, and of course dealing with a lot of other angles from Syria, from Iran, from Iraq, from the Houthis. Everything starts and ends in Iran. We say it again and again.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, if you have something to add about Lebanon, I'd like to hear that. But also beyond that, if we may also focus on Judea, Samaria, the Jordan Valley for that matter. Of course, prior to the atrocities committed on October 7th, Israel was very deliberate in its activities in Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley, particularly as part of its operation Wastebreaker, apprehending thousands of suspected terror operatives. Of course, after investigating, many of them were also released, but nonetheless, it was very instrumental in cracking down on Iranian efforts to flood those territories west of the Jordan River with weaponry, munitions, with finance to try and buy off all kind of clans, particularly in the northern part of this territory, that are less affiliated or less loyal to the faction Fatah, which is affiliated, of course, and led by Palestinian Authority chairman or president Mahmoud Abbas.
So let's separate the two fronts which you touched on, and start with Judea and Samaria, because as you remarked, the fight there preceded the war, October the 7th, and is not really, even though the Rongavish is right, everything is related to everything else, it did not emanate from the war and will not stop, even if there is a ceasefire in Gaza. So yes, there is quite an intense fight in almost all sectors of Judea and Samaria. The Israeli Central Command and the Judea and Samaria Division are trying to go on the offensive. They conduct very long and deep operations, trying to uproot the various cells which belong to several organizations, and they are being helped by drones and other methods. But this fight, of course, is going to be there for a long time. Now, as for the North, there is this debate, this dispute within the Israeli War Cabinet. The Minister of Defense, Gallant, on his own volition, because he is also a very experienced military man, he is a retired Major General, but also on the recommendation of the IDF General Staff, would like to shift the center of gravity from Gaza to the north. And this would entail the ceasefire in the south, which also will bring about the release of the hostages in 2 stages, but also a ceasefire in the north, because as the fight goes on right now, it's really senseless. It's a war of attrition with no achievable goals. It will simply go on and on. Israeli airstrikes and some artillery strikes, Hezbollah rocket, drone, and anti-tank projectile attacks, people being displaced for almost 11 months now. What's the point? However, Prime Minister Netanyahu has a veto power over the decisions in the war cabinet. Interestingly enough, Netanyahu cannot force his view on the military. He's first among equals under the Israeli system, and he must go through the Minister of Defense in order for the minister to instruct the military through the chief of the general staff. This is how the chain of command works. And there is a lot of bad blood between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. So the Israeli population, as they are stuck in the stands, they look at the pitch below them and are aghast at what is happening between two of their most senior leaders while the war is going on. And as time goes by, decisions are not being made by the cabinet. And it's a very unfortunate fact as Israel is heading towards the first anniversary of the war.
Aghast by the division. Hafred umshol, we say in Hebrew.
Yes, divide and rule.
Divide and conquer, or divide and rule. When we're talking about the capacity to isolate Netanyahu and the defense establishment was very successful. Some may say that the Americans were instrumental in that, particularly the Biden administration, for fear of what Smotrich, the finance minister, might do there as part of his role in the administrative aspect, being a minister within the defense ministry, and therefore that opened a door for a certain wall or heights. How would I define that word? I'm not sure, but nonetheless, partition, sure. But as you mentioned, since 1976, the law that ultimately gave all the reins of power within the defense establishment to the defense minister has positioned him in a very powerful post, and therefore many prime ministers have decided to assume both roles. But I'd like to ask you, Miri, since you were a senior military advisor to a number of prime ministers, when you really look at the broad scheme of things, how would you currently identify the challenges presented, particularly in Judea and Samaria?
The Islamic regime of Iran has not added many anniversaries to its calendar. And the one that they added in 1979, Al-Quds Day, which is celebrated in that sense during the month of Ramadan. And this is something that the Islamic regime of Iran did to focus both on Jerusalem and Al-Quds. And I say Judea and Samaria, and at the end, at the heart of Judea and Samaria, you have Jerusalem, Al-Quds, a holy city for everybody. And when the Islamic regime of Iran try to get everybody on board with them, what they try to use is the Jerusalem Al-Quds card. What they try to inflame is that Israel is doing bad things in Jerusalem because the closest, nearest potential, those who can come and overrun would be in Judea and Samaria. And I want to say sadly that the combination of the 11 months of fighting against the Hamas on the Gaza Strip, and it's the Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad is totally an Islamic regime proxy. And add into that Hamas is more than willing to get that kind of support, that the younger generation today in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, is so open to social media that is completely amplified by the machinations of the Islamic regime of Iran, that you have a situation where the younger generation in Judea and Samaria, those under the age of 20, and most likely half the population in the Palestinian arena, in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank is under the age of 20. They are fueled by that Islamic regime of Iran's money, ideas, extremism, radicalization. They look and view what's happening in the Gaza Strip as an inspiration rather than anything else. And here we are looking at the beginning of what is essentially an explosion where you have finances, radicalization, extreme ideas, and the view of the younger generation within the West Bank that they don't have any kind of a future. So let's go out in flames. And Israel is trying to douse out those flames. And this is not an easy thing to do because we're fighting against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip. Because as we described earlier, we have the challenge of Hezbollah in Lebanon and all of the additional proxies aside from what's going on within Judea and Samaria. So as Doron said, it's all connected, but in Judea and Samaria, and we need to remember these numbers, in addition to the 2.5 million Palestinians, half of which are under the age of 20, you have over 500,000 Israeli citizens. It's a proximity, it's a friction, which you don't have in other places. And to protect the Israelis who live there, in that arena where they met, the West Bankers may not be coming into Israel, but they're in the West Bank. And these are challenges that we need to contend with. We can't let it explode. I was a full colonel in regular service in the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada exploded on Israeli streets in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and in Jerusalem. We haven't seen a full-scale war in the West Bank. And if that happens, that's going to take troops from down south, troops from up north. It's an ugly kind of fight. And sadly, Jonathan, the world will not be on our side. So there's the added implication of what that does worldwide because the area of Judea and Samaria is in dispute already.
Absolutely. And as Israel is regarded by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its patrons, be they in Beijing or Moscow, as an extension of the United States in the Middle East, naturally we see TikTok, we see all kind of social media efforts and cyber efforts by these three and even more. We're talking, of course, also about Malaysia and North Korea and other countries that are stimulating disinformation and amplifying all kind of algorithms to try and fuel the streets in those territories. Of course, countermeasures are being employed, but nonetheless, we do see hatred being blown throughout those territories. The same is being done also against Israelis, and we're seeing this amplified, and therefore, General Gavish, you're very much active in an organization called Arevim Ze Lazeh, something that, of course, you're trying to push the matter of solidarity within Israeli society. What can you tell us about those efforts, very briefly, if I may, and what can be done to establish a discourse of solidarity, of unity at such a tough time as this?
Well, thank you, Jonathan, to allow me to speak about it, because we don't usually do it here. We talk about security stuffs, but when it comes to the resilience of Israel, and this is also part of our security, probably the main part of our security, the resilience would come within ourselves. We have a very hard challenges, as we know, very tough neighborhood, but more than anything else, to be a resilient society, this is our number one job, and this is what we are trying to do. We see that within the discourse of Israel, we are in a point that to some extent we don't listen to each other. Each one have his own ideas, his own beliefs, and we are in a point that even we in some extent see even hatred within our own society, and this is something that we cannot allow ourselves. We should be here together. We don't have to, it's not that we must have a unity within our government, but this is a democracy, and we are here together in one of the most challenging times in our history, and understanding that being together, the basic of being together, like in a couple, in a family, in the neighborhood, is being able to discuss with each other and to trust each other. And this is what we are trying to work with within the Israeli society, because we believe that the day after, and that we are talking about it very, I would say for a long time, the day after is here when we are talking about our own society.
Mr. Oren, last sentence from you.
Yes, don't blame the media, from Gutenberg to Zuckerberg, from newspapers and pamphlets to radio, be it FDR's fireside chats or Gamal Abdel Nasser's fiery speeches, and then the cassettes that Khomeini distributed and on to television and social media. People are thinking, maybe rightly or wrongly, it's not the media, it's the ideas which power people, and the other side, in this case ourselves, we should have the power to defend ourselves.
Colonel Eisen, last sentence.
There's no question that what we need right now are voices that are willing to listen. And I think that the media is a platform, but it's a strong one, so I wouldn't discount it. But I do want us all to talk to each other.
Doron, last sentence, really short.
Well, I urge our viewers to go to, in English, it's called Stop Ilug hashtag, and to get to our Instagram and to see what we are offering to those that are willing to listen, as it was put it by Miri.
Noted. Well, I'd like to thank General Gavish, Colonel Eisen, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel, and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.